So I appreciate the space and the time for everyone that's interested in this type of work. So without further ado, we'll just move into it. So I'm Erica Hall. Currently serve as the board chair of the Florida Food Policy Council. I'm also the vice chair of the Sierra Club Florida chapter. Next slide, please. So what I like to usually start with is an indigenous land acknowledgement. I currently live here in St. Petersburg. So I live on the occupied lands of the Seminole, Tocobaga, and Calusa tribes. So for me, territory acknowledgement is always a way to give thanks and praise to our ancestors, both African and indigenous presence and land rights in everyday life. So I like to usually do it, and I like to ask people if you could put in the chat where you live and work in occupied lands and how you pay respect to those indigenous people. So there's a link there that I usually use if you don't use it. And I believe Tracy will put it in the chat, and you all can put the lands that where you live and where you're occupied. Next slide, please. So again, I'm currently the chair of the Florida Food Policy Council, which is a statewide food policy council. We work to address gaps and affect policy within the food system here in Florida for the benefit of all Floridians and the environment. So the gaps that we address include a disconnect between farmers and producers, consumers. We look at disparities in food access, policy barriers to food democracy, and racial inequities of BIPOC farmers' access to land and resources. So we build capacity, and we also try to increase our human and social capital while building racial equity within the Florida food system. So that's a lot, and that's a lot of work. And that's why I believe I was asked to give this talk, because it's something that I spend a lot of time doing, and sometimes it's successful. Oftentimes it's not. It feels like you spin your wheels, but you keep going because it's something that's important. Next slide. At the same time, I also serve the Sierra Club Florida chapter and the Suncoast Group, which is located here in the Tampa Bay region. So if you all are familiar with the Sierra Club, their mission is, it's an environmental traditional conservation organization. So we really look to explore and protect the natural places here in Florida while we teach others to be stewards of the earth. And my role with that group is I bring the Jedi to a traditionally white conservation space. So my role there is they call me the Jedi Master for Star Wars geeks. That no explanation should be necessary. But those that are not familiar with Jedi, is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I bring that into the conservation and traditional environmental space. Next slide, please. So some of my areas of expertise, I'm a CED practitioner, again, a Jedi facilitator and trainer. I spend a lot of time doing capacity building, technical support, and I provide technical assistance consultation to small nonprofits and our members throughout the state of Florida in rural areas, urban areas, indigenous farm worker communities, as well as African-American communities and community redevelopment assistance neighborhoods. And I'm also a sustainability, resiliency, and environmental justice organizer. So those are just some of the things that I do. And the topic of this is organizing. So I take what I'm good at and what I do, and I use it to organize with others to come up with theories of change that are for food and environmental justice work, which we know those are inextricably linked. So next slide, please. This one I'll skip. Again, I'm the vice chair of the Suncoast Group. I'm also on the Florida Department of Agriculture Advisory Committee to help the Department of Agriculture supposedly come up with a food action plan for the state. But I just found some news out that's very disturbing that the state is developing an advisory council of food banks and corporate ag, and they are cutting out small food policy councils and groups that do the work on the ground. So I'm currently writing a rebuttal, and I'm running around to pull a lot of people together for us to come up with an op-ed and rebuttal to the state. I also work for the North American Food Systems Network called NAFSN. I'm a volunteer. All of this is volunteer, by the way. I don't get paid for this. So the leadership circle of NAFSN. NAFSN is the preeminent professional development association for people that work in the food system. Erin, I know you mentioned you were a law student and you're new in this work. I would suggest looking at NAFSN as you become involved in this work, because they do a lot of work with law students and with universities around the country. Next slide, please. This, I'm on the Sierra Club. Some of the things I do is represent that group at festivals and speak about environmental justice work that we do in Florida. So this was me at the Tampa Bay Collard Green Festival last year, and I'll be a keynote speaker again this year here in Tampa Bay. So that's one of the ways that we spread the message. Next slide, please. The organizing work that I do is really created by the relationships that I create. Again, Nikki Freed, I'm a part of her statewide group, the Sierra Club, the Executive Committee, NAFSN, and the League of Women Voters here in St. Petersburg, the Food Politics Action Team. So that's part of how I build my organizing strategy, and my skills is to be a part of these groups and come to meetings and bring disconnect to connect the disconnected. That's what I call it. Next slide, please. Also, my work, I've been involved with the Wallace Center for quite some time, and much appreciative of the space and the platform that they provide to leaders such as myself. I was a member of the Community Food System Mentorship Program last year, and I was mentored with Malik Yakini, who is a guru in food systems. He also is in Detroit, the Detroit Black Food Security Network. So I've known him for years, but we only reconnected thanks to the Wallace Center. So that was a powerful reconnection, and he helped me really a lot with my leadership. And as I was going through this Jedi transition and board members were leaving because some of them didn't agree that our work should be done through an equity lens, he was integral in helping me to really sharpen and hone my leadership skills in my role as the board chair. So much appreciative to the Wallace Center for that program. I was also in their organizational change for racial justice and fundamental facilitation for racial justice work, which let me just stop and say that was very important, because one, my organization was selected to look at themselves and look at the organization and how they want to change to be effective to do racial justice work. And then I was also trained to be a facilitator to help other groups that were part of the program and other food policy councils around the country and different organizations that were selected by the Wallace Center. So that was an excellent way, one, for me to give back to the community and at the same time to learn from other groups around the country. I'm also in the North American Association for Environmental Educators as a fellow, and this is where the intersectionality of the work comes in, because this is an environmental education group, but again, food and the environment is inextricably linked, so our work is connected, and the people throughout the nation in that program are doing amazing work connecting environmental education with food, as well as young people and communities of color. Finally, I was accepted as a fellow in the Community Food Systems Fellowship, which is an incredible project of Vital Village at Boston Medical Center. I believe Lisa's on the phone and she's one of the administrators of that program. So much appreciative to them for helping me to create my theory of change for this work. And then finally, the Interinstitutional Network for Food and Sustainability at UC Davis is a group I'm involved in. That's an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary group of academics, professors, students, community advocates, and people throughout universities that do this work. So those are some of the groups that I'm involved in, and that's how I'm able to organize and create strategies. Next slide, please. People ask me how I get it done. My leadership approach, which is my go-to, is intersectionality. And that's how I'm able to continue to do everything that I do and be present in all of these groups, is because I use it as a way to understand people's social and political identities. And, you know, we center social justice from various social locations. So as you see from the circles, the environmental justice circle, the food justice circle, social justice, and health justice, all of those are, again, inextricably linked. And in order to help to create change and solve those problems, we need to work together intersectionally. So that's why I spend the time that I do attending these groups and these meetings, because I build relationships with those groups, and the intersectionality of our work is how we get things done. Next slide. Again, not to go through this, you all, I'm sure everyone here is a professional, so you're familiar with intersectionality and what it is and what it's about. But the point that I would make here is to be successful in this work as an organizer and in this space, if you're not intersectional and deliberate in who you align yourself with in your organization, you may want to take some time to become a little more intersectional with communities in your region, whether it's the NAACP or SUAC or a synagogue or your faith-based organization, environmental groups. The more people and the more groups that you have helping you build this collaboration and collective is the more the better, actually, and it's more powerful, and I believe it's more effective. So that's a way that I use my own personal organizing skills to be able to be successful. Next slide, please. Some of the other terms that I've become familiar with in this work and sitting on a lot of calls and a lot of meetings is intersectional environmentalism and radical hospitality. So these are terms that before I really became immersed in this work, I really was not very familiar with until I actually started to do the work. So intersectional environmentalism, again, advocates for the protection of all people on the planet. Conversations within these spaces can't minimize or ignore the injustices that target vulnerable communities and natural ecosystems. So it's important that we look at our environment and how we can work together to be better stewards of the earth. So that is very important with the work, combining the food systems and food justice work with the environmental justice work. Radical hospitality is something that I've been doing that I didn't know I was doing until a professor told me I was doing it. It's defined as a practice of putting extraordinary effort and emphasis on making people feel welcome. And the academic community that I partner with they've told me that I'm very good at that, and that I make people from other disciplines feel comfortable, and I provide that space. So that was important to hear from the academic community, that it's not too it's not too simplified for them. And Florida is very important because Florida is the poster child for climate change right now. We see the need for intersectional environmentalism is very important. And we're at crisis levels here in Florida in many ways around coastal flooding, hazard, toxic air and water quality in certain communities of color, especially here in St. Pete. And I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of my talk. So next slide, please. So these are some of the ways that I do the work that I do, and some of the results of that work quickly and projects that I'm working on is with USF, which is University of South Florida. I'm partnering with them for a grant for the Florida Food Policy Council. We're working on a course with them and the USF Urban Food Sovereignty Group. So we're doing a course that's going to combine the environmental piece with food and climate change. I was integral in bringing Dr. Robert Bullard, who's the father of environmental justice, for those not familiar with him. He came to USF St. Pete, and we had a series of discussions in town halls with him in conjunction with ICAR, which is the Initiative on Coastal Adaptation and Resilience. So again, this is where my work is so intersectional, because through ICAR, there's a tool called CRIS, which stands for Community Resiliency Information System. And it's a tool to foster resiliency. And it's a web-based application that allows communities to identify unique resiliency needs by combining biophysical vulnerability with sea level rise, flooding, and storm surge impact. So what we did in the Black community in particular, they used this tool and they were able to drill down by neighborhoods, sea level rising, flooding, and storm surge impacts now and 10 years from now, and how much of our communities throughout St. Petersburg will be underwater or very close to it. So they asked me as the community member to come in and explain to a lot of seniors and community leaders why it was important for the Black community to pay attention to this. So this is where the work became even more intersectional, because explaining to them that your homes flood, that's more money to you, and your bills go up, your insurance goes up. A lot of things are related to the climate change in their homes and the vulnerability, especially socioeconomic in communities of color. So once we explain that to the community, aha moment came on for a lot of people that really didn't connect to climate change and to environmental justice, because they think it's a term that white people use. Resiliency and sustainability, I've been told, are luxurious terms that real people don't use. So I spent a lot of time trying to convince people of the opposite, that we're the resilient ones and we're the sustainable ones, and we've been the stewards of the earth for a long time. So that thinking probably needs to be changed. And then finally, due to this work with USF, we have entered into a community-based participatory research partnership where USF is going to add a food insecurity module to ICAR, which will allow us to drill down even deeper to show pockets of not just climate change, but food insecurity, which also we found the same neighborhoods have high level of diabetes and high blood pressure, and a lot of health disparities that we all know exist in BIPOC communities. So the result of me doing the intersectional work that I do has resulted in these projects that I work on currently that keeps me so busy. Next slide, please. So continuing that, I'm working to create a community food action plan here in the city of St. Petersburg, hoping to duplicate that throughout other counties in Pinellas and throughout Florida, working with a neighborhood association in Campbell Park, supported by St. Petersburg College, the city and the neighborhood association to create a food forest in food insecure neighborhoods in vacant land. So working with those neighborhood associations, the city council council member of that neighborhood, and my team, we hope to start to be able to build food forests in neighborhoods that are food insecure without access to grocery stores. And with that came the creation of the St. Petersburg Food Policy Council, which I'm also helping to spearhead that project and help the city of St. Pete work and create a food action plan and get their food systems work off the ground. With that, I created a partnership with the NAACP, Environmental and Climate Justice statewide committee. Florida is currently the only state with a nationwide, with a statewide environmental and climate justice organizing team. So that tells you that in the Black community, climate change is urgent, it's extreme, and it's very important. So we do a lot of work with them, and we do a lot of talks around in Haitian communities in Miami and South Florida, in Spanish-speaking neighborhoods, again, in farm worker communities, indigenous communities, so that we can educate people about climate change and what happens as a result of climate change, in addition to the food and health disparities. I also was recently asked to sit on a county sustainability and resiliency advisory committee because of my work with the Sierra Club and being out all the time, talking so much, running my mouth, as I call it. But I think people are finally starting to get that we have to pull these resources together in order to be successful. And then that's led me to create a Jedi leadership circle within the Sierra Club. So that's just some of the projects and the results of the work that I've spent the last 2 years making these relationships and these connections to build this work. So next slide, please. And I'll try to wrap it up. But there's so much to say. We could have these conversations for days, but so I just spoke at USF Urban Food Sovereignty Group, and they asked me to talk about food sovereignty and cultural resiliency and what lessons from a pandemic. So just briefly, this connects to what we're discussing. Some of the lessons that I've learned as a leader traveling in the state and also nationally and being a part of the groups that I'm a part of, that food, environmental, social, and racial justice, again, are inextricably linked, as evidenced by the connections between climate change, food waste, soil health, regenerative agriculture, clean water, sea level rising, beach erosion, coastal flooding, and urban agriculture. So in Florida, all of these things are connected, and we're trying to work on all of them collectively together. As evidenced by, of course, the pandemic and recent racial and social justice events, many food policy councils, including ours, have changed and are changing our mission, values, and goals. But at the same time, re-examining our strategic plans, looking through a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion lens, which again, caused transition within our organization. And I believe it causes transition within organizations, because some people will be ready to do that work, but others will not. And that's one thing that I've learned. Don't take it personal. It's a part of what we do, and everyone's not going to be on that same page with you and have that mentality. I took it personal as a leader, and I thought it was a direct result of my leadership style, maybe, and the way I communicate and who I am. But it was not, because as people left the board, we had people join the board, and we also had people interested in partnering with us because of our intersectional work. So again, in wake of the pandemic, food policy councils have emerged as a critical structure for organizing community-based responses to multiple food systems issues. So again, we're not just a food policy council. We're asked to hold discussions around COVID vaccines, racial disparities, health disparities, caregiver responsibilities. We see now with the pandemic and death, more people's roles have shifted within their families, grandparents raising grandkids, people partnering up to live together, more caregivers. I'm a caregiver for my parent. So this has become something that we've also become a leader in. People asked us to host these very important discussions to discuss a wide variety of topics, but to me, it all comes back again to food and our environment. Next slide, please. And Tracy, let me know how I'm doing on time too, please.
You're
good. Okay, great. So some other lessons learned here in Florida. We have a huge problem with hunger and food insecurity. So for me, that's number one. Almost 3 million Floridians are struggling with hunger. Almost, as you can see, over 800,000 of them are children. So that means that approximately 1 in 8 struggle with hunger. Food insecurity increased for Black and non-Hispanic households. As you can see, I won't read the stat, you all can see it, but it's jumped pretty much. And in the South, it's an even bigger jump. And we know why, because again, it's the environment, it's the water, it's the air, it's lack of access to the food. And you have these bodegas and corner stores where the food is not healthy and fast food. So all of that kind of compounds the issue as well. We found data that show BIPOC people more likely to depend on public transportation and live in areas with a lack of access to grocery stores. Again, so it makes it challenging for them to stock up on supplies for staying at home. So people still have to get out and find ways to find food and feed themselves. So we've seen the inequities of the food system unveiled to us, and it's ugly and it's not pretty. And as leaders, we are the ones that have to step up and take charge and show the government and leaders that we are going to own this space. As we all know, COVID death rates among communities of color are highest. So again, in Florida, the need for our work is particularly urgent. Next slide. So briefly, food. What makes food unjust? To me, people of color are the ones most severely impacted by hunger, poor food access, and diet-related illnesses and other problems within the system. Again, environmental and food justice intersect. Here in Florida, and I'm sure in other communities, factory farms and meat packing plants pollute our communities. It pollutes our water and air, and more times than not are situated in communities of color. So that's a problem. And then food justice efforts, to me, work not only for access to healthy food, but for an end to the structural inequities that lead to the unequal health outcomes. Next slide. Thank you. So to me, some of the major challenges that I found and resolving food insecurity, communities of color, of course, remain on the forefronts of fighting two public health crises simultaneously, I call it, a global pandemic and systemic racism, which threatens our livelihood and safety on a day-by-day basis. We are bearing witness to it. One requires a vaccine and the other justice. Food insecurity is not simply a money problem, it is also a racism problem. So people tell me, it's not race that causes food insecurity. I disagree. It may not be the only cause, but it's a huge reason for why communities of color don't have the same access to grocery stores and healthy food. Low-income families are also affected by multiple overlapping issues like lack of affordable housing, social isolation, chronic or acute health problems, high medical costs, poor working conditions, and low wages. We all know that. Next slide, please. This one I'll skip. It's just about a food deserts, and you all work in this space, so you know. For me, the main thing here I'll mention, I don't use food desert as much because it makes it seem like these communities are lacking when they are actually filled with life and resilience. So that term makes the problem of food access and insecurity seem like a natural phenomenon, and it absolves responsibility, in my opinion. That's why people like, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. People like Karen Washington and my mentor, Malik Yakini, and a lot of people in this space, Erica Allen, and people that I work with and follow, Leah Penman, they use food apartheid over food deserts because they feel food apartheid looks more at the whole food system along with race, geography, faith, and economics. So it looks at the whole food system, and it acknowledges that it is a system of inequity, especially on the grounds of race. So for me, that's probably why I stopped using the term food deserts, and I say more food sovereignty, food apartheid, and different terms. Next, food justice. Next slide, please. And then finally, food sovereignty is this term a lot of people are using quickly. I see it in some of these definitions. It's a social movement that fosters community resiliency by localizing food production and consumption. For me, that kind of says it all. And then the right of people to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. So those things to me give ownership back to our local communities and our local stakeholders and our local leaders to take control to foster that resilience in your community. So that's another term that people use that has been used a lot. So I just wanted to put those terms out there so people can see, if you hear food sovereignty, food justice versus food apartheid, you know what people mean by that. Next slide, please. So policy recommendations to me in the work that I do, I see that local, state, and federal policies need to better support the food systems. Funding is key. And then again, collaborations and partnerships are key. And this highlights all the work that I do, because with these groups, we all can apply for funding, or if they need a letter of support from me, or in-kind donation, and vice versa, or volunteers or speakers for a town hall, we work together to make sure that we provide this support to each other. We need to create and fund innovative public-private partnerships that spark economic development and improve health. Funding sources and capital that don't need to be paid back. In addition to government grants and foundation funding, we need venture capital and other funding sources such as New Venture Advisors, and I'll put the link there, and I'll share all of this info with Tracy if she wants to send it on to you all. But I spent a lot of time studying grants and funding and trying to figure out the best ways to come up with this financial package that's supposed to help nonprofits, but it doesn't, because they need to loosen up restricted funds and allow small groups like mine, and I'm sure like some of yours, those general operating costs that help us keep the lights on, rather than restricting it to just programs. We do still have to do our everyday, day-to-day work. So I'm a big proponent of having general operating costs and money loosened up for that. The Healthy Food Financing Initiative is back. The Obama administration started it. It's a way to bring grocery stores and other healthy food retailers to underserved communities. The Biden administration, thank goodness, revived it, put more money into it, took a lot of the restrictions that the Republicans had previously put in during the Obama administration to make it a little bit easier for communities to have access to these funds. Next slide, please. Also, I would say provide better access to grants and loans to projects seeking to improve access to healthy food by financing grocery stores, farmers markets, food hubs, and co-ops. I'll take the grocery store thing out because I work more with cooperatives and food hubs and farmers markets, youth farm, food forests. I look at alternative ways to feed ourselves rather than wait for a grocery store to come and plop down to be that anchor that brings other stores. So sometime in the hood, they are not interested in coming in and being an anchor to bring economic development to communities of color. So we need to create and fund innovative public-private partnerships that, again, spark economic development and improve health. Some of the sources you all know are out there: Justice 40, American Relief Bill, the EPA, Health and Human Services, the USDA, and Build Back Better. So those are some of the funding sources that are out there for you all to look at and see if there's ways you could partner up and apply for those grants with other groups. Last slide, please, as we wrap it up. So some of my final thoughts. With everything I said, I'm still inspired these days a lot by all of you out there doing the work that you're doing. Some of the most transformative work happens at the grassroots level, led by BIPOC members and leaders. Groups like the USF Urban Food Sovereignty Group, Clio Institute, the Black Church Food Security Network in Baltimore, the Florida Food Policy Council, and other groups. They're all working to address food insecurity and anti-Blackness by growing food and advocating for redistribution of resources. So they all following the tradition of organizing and mutual aid that led Fannie Lou Hamer to start Freedom Farms Cooperative and the Black Panther Party to offer free breakfast to children and groceries to families. These efforts are often grassroots and hyper-local, but at the same time, they make a huge difference. So that's just some of the ongoing projects that we're working on here in Florida: scanning communities, mapping councils, a toolkit. A project near and dear to my heart is story mapping Black and BIPOC farmers here in Florida and telling their stories. So that's some of the work that keeps me motivated, inspired, and occupied. So with that, we'll wrap it up. If there's any questions or comments, I'm more than happy to hear it. And then you could just go to the next slide, please, since I didn't have a chance to do this one. So volunteer your time. That's key. Make your voices heard, become leaders in your community, and educate and advocate for yourself. We know, and others, we know that the world needs a food system that delivers healthy, safe, and nutritious foods to everyone, everywhere, and ensures a decent income for farmers and food workers, tackles climate change, and protects nature. So with that, my contact info is on this page. If anyone's interested in reaching out to find out what we're doing, how we could work together, if there's anything that you may want our assistance with, or just to run things past us, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Erica. This has been a really rich presentation. So many resources. It looks like you have 100 jobs, but I'm glad you're there doing it because we need you. And I just have a quick question about the radical hospitality. I don't think I've heard about that before. I'm just wondering, what was who were the people that, I guess, framed it in an academic way, and what have you seen as like the benefits of using that type of outreach?
I see it as, and I'm sorry, you asked me about radical hospitality. Yes. It's a way to make people feel comfortable from different disciplines. People are at different stages in this work. Some people are deep in it, others are not. So making sure that you lay the foundation for everyone to have that comfort level, to feel free to share, to be vulnerable, to be on level playing field, and for everyone to have access to that same space. So I think that's where that term comes from, as you're pulling different people together from academic world, from grassroots, from professional people that work in corporations or big ag, making sure that we all kind of connect and everybody starts at the same level as far as respect and that common decency that everyone has.
Yeah.
And that's where we do the community agreements, right, Jane? Like we do in these meetings. That's where people come up with all of that. The community agreements, it comes from radical hospitality because you're setting the stage for people to come in and feel comfortable. If that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. That helps a lot. Thank you.
And to me, it sounds like, and it so well captures, I feel like, Erica, how you approach all this work. It's like centering people and relationships at the core. And I feel like oftentimes in these kind of organizing efforts, it's all about your goal. It's about the vision you have, but you forget that without people, you can't do any of it. And so it's like, it's such an, this is the first time I'm hearing this term, but it's such an amazing way to frame how this organizing has to go in order to be successful, and also to like take care of all the people doing it. Because that's the other thing I was struck by, is how much time and energy and labor and emotion goes into all of this. And if you aren't taking care of yourself and each other, you won't get anywhere. And so this idea of radical hospitality is amazing and really encapsulates, I feel like, how you have to approach the work, and how, Erica, you are approaching the work.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're going to make sure everyone who registered got the slides so that they can get in touch with you if they want to, and then just learn more about all these organizations that you're working with.